again for joining us today. This is our second to last Design Land Gap series. Next week we are going to be going over Procreate. So if you're interested, we have a recent graduate, Katie Stern, as well as one of our current faculty, Ross Turner, who are going to be going over Procreate. It should be really fun. So let's go ahead and get started today. Amanda Garcia, I am the program director for our digital design, PR, and digital media marketing programs here at Tulane SOPA. And we're so happy today. We have Samantha Barnes with us, who is right next to me here in the grid. And she is one of our adjunct professors in digital design, and she teaches a plethora of courses within our interactive track. And she was actually nominated by many students as one of our outstanding faculty and won that award this year, not to embarrass her, but we kind of like her. We're gonna keep her around. So we're happy that she's joining us today. All right, so we did end up going ahead and give you guys a few downloads you can use for this. Once again, XD is very different than Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or InDesign or anything you're familiar with. It is an Adobe application, but it is very different. So feel free to just follow along today, and then we're going to send you this video if you would like to actually practice this yourself, but don't get overwhelmed if you think it's a lot. Sam is great at kind of going step by step, but we just want you to know that even if you can't keep up today, it's not a big deal. Feel free to go back and watch the video later. So if you're on your computer right now and have another window open, feel free to go to this downloads folder. We have two different files for you to download. One's a zip and then one is a .xd extension. So as I'm kind of going through this introduction, feel free to just download this now, or like I said, feel free to do that and then watch this at a later time and follow along that way. Also, housekeeping, you see the little chat box down at the bottom there. Ask any questions that you may need. We have myself and Professor Rebecca Carr is back with us again today, who will be monitoring that chat. So as Professor Barnes is moving through the demonstration, if we see any questions come up in the chat, Rebecca and I will be addressing those as Professor Barnes is able to move forward. If we see, like we've been doing, if we see a multiple, like a pattern of questions around the same topic, we'll make sure to pause for a minute and have Professor Barnes address those questions. All right, so first we want to talk a little bit about what is interactive design. We've got some really beautiful examples. This is all student work done here at Tulane SOPA. So we're just going to show you generally what is app design that we're going to be talking about today, and interactivity in general. And so Samantha and I are going to be going back and forth on some of these that were done in our different classes. So I teach a class on UX design, so user experience design, and our class is focused on research and then taking real world problems and solving them digitally. So this is a beautiful project by Katie Stern, and her real world problem was managing all of her roommates, who needs to pay, who needs to do chores, etc. And so she designed this great app in my class called Housemates, and it has won all kinds of crazy awards, and we're really proud of her. And she's the one who's going to be doing the Procreate tutorial next week. This is student Megan Calvin. She designed this for the Apple Watch first. And this is an app that will allow you to monitor your heart rate for any arrhythmias, etc., replacing like a Holter monitor or something like that. So this is a medical device, which is really beautiful. So in XD, she did this in XD. You can prototype for the Apple Watch, wearable tech, basically, as well as the mobile phone.
This was my student, Ashley Chen, and which I already miss her greatly. This was a app design that the students were challenged to take a brief that I assigned them, and it wasn't even assigned, it was randomly picked from a bowl. And then they had to make a branded app for an existing culture piece. So the culture piece for here was, this is based on Steven Universe, and one of the main protagonists of the show needed an app to categorize all of the gems that she and Steven found along the way, and Ashley built it out to have a bit more of a community social media function as well, so that they could all collaborate on what they were deciding. So Ashley did a really good job here. She not only iterated in XD, but she did do some design in Illustrator as well. This was, at the end of this class, it's the same class, they have a toss-up. I kind of throw them sideways a little bit because a lot of people get used to designing apps and they forget how to design for desktop. And there's just some apps, web apps in particular, that function best on desktop. For instance, the one we use here at Tulane called Canvas has minimized features for mobile and tablet versus the desktop feature. So this is Anna Tujas. She did an app based on how to find her stuff. So if you guys ever heard of Tile, the Tile feature, this is kind of along that lines, like different people who were able to come up with different versions of Tile and manage all of those Tile-like products in one place. And lastly, this one is from Lauren DeBott. Her web app is about finding things quickly. So the purpose of this was to be able to locate, like, let's say Walgreens is out of toilet paper, your kid needs toilet paper and we need it now. Where can you go? And you don't want to drive all over the city, so you just go to OffE, which is based on the name for a Band-Aid in the UK, I believe. And they will tell you not only where you can get it, but how much they have in stock and how much the price is. So you can go to the most competitive priced and the best. Like, you don't want to go somewhere they don't have one left. You want to go somewhere you've got a good chance. So this one is a app. This is along the same lines as the Steven Universe app. This is the Bates Motel would like to market their experiences, and so Hannah was challenged with creating a tourism app for a horror show, as if the people in that show were her client, and so that's why it might look a little bit a little interesting.
Very.
Yeah.
This is one of our last examples. So this is done by student Tamsin Jenkins to kind of be a dating app between animals, pet lovers, and animals, where it will help you match the best pet for you and where you can adopt and foster, etc. So as you can see, there is a ton that can be done with user experience design and user interaction design. And so today we're going to be diving into a small little piece of that in Adobe XD. And like Professor Barnes said, there are many different applications that you could use to do this. XD is just one of them, but we feel like it's pretty seamless if you're just learning. It's a great way to kind of dig into app design, mobile app design, web app design, etc. And we're going to get started. So Sam, I'm going to let you go over from here.
Okay, so these are some slides from my my interactive design classes. So if they enjoy those memes, I'm a heavy user of those. So the first thing I always teach our students is that UX is not UI. UI can involve UX, but it's not the same thing. And so user experience design is the process of enhancing and improving not just the way it looks, but how it feels, how you interact with it, the accessibility, the whole thing. There are user experience designers who don't ever touch design tools. And their whole job is to just design the experience. And then they hand it off to someone who only handles the UI. So in recap, like it says here, a UX designer can be a UI designer, but most of the times a UI designer may not be a UX designer. So I know that's a weird little if-then statement, but that is kind of how it works. So, all right, so this is the design process that I teach and follow in our classes. Everyone's process is different, so don't at me. But for this one in particular, for the user experience design process, we try to teach first, the understanding of who your users are, because you are not your user. I know we're all tempted to think we are, but we are not the user. And it's important to test for others and try to eliminate like our implicit and cognitive biases. So first things first, understand. Got to understand the brief and got to understand the client, and you have to understand where you're headed and what the requirements are. And sometimes that means adding extra ones so that you have like a little bit more to bounce off of. The next is research. So obviously this falls in line a little bit with the marketing side, but still just as important because you need to understand the behaviors of your users. So analyzing their competitors, researching what's currently on the market, understanding current trends. We do a lot of reading from a group called A Book Apart in our classes to talk about like the best optimal guidelines for touch design and gestural design, and also accessibility, information architecture, all those big words. But basically that's the first two things. So they spend the first 2 weeks usually like getting to know their clients, building deck, doing research, maybe even doing some testing as they start to like build their hypothesis, as it were. So the next one, there we go. Oop, we skipped ahead. No biggie. All right, no worries. So the next one is sketch. So sketch is where you kind of gather your ideas, draw your sketches in wireframes. That's what everyone pretty much thinks of as like user experience, like where you go next. A lot of the times you want to make sure that the ideas that you've gathered it through testing or some sort of research. And then this is the part where a lot of students get tripped up because we have to iterate a lot. So you do wireframes, and we're going to talk a little bit about what those are during the XD promo. But wireframes aren't as exciting as a mockup. They're usually just boxes. But the information architecture stage where you figure out where all the boxes are supposed to go is important because you don't want to invest a ton of time into something that may not be successful. And so you pretty much do a lot of evaluating and redrawing and things like that. So then we move on to design, and that's where the fun stuff comes in. That's where you really get to take XD and just straight to the moon. You get to create prototypes that transition and do fun things that your users can interact with, that your client can interact with, your stakeholders. Also, you start to define like what those transitions and interactions really look like and how they work. At this point is when you're supposed to kind of build the experience and implement the functionality so that you can start user testing. Because you don't want to get too far down the pipeline. So I think that one point, we have to point that out a little bit in class, is that implement doesn't mean launch it. It doesn't mean ship it or deploy it. It means get it to a point where someone can interact with it and recognize it while it's still like in a benchmark situation, a sandbox, as you were. And then you're evaluating it. You're handing it to people. You're like, how does this work? What do you think? What's going on? You create audit reports, which basically means like, did people do what they were supposed to do? Did the designer, create the right thing? Did the developer make the thing the way we said it should go? And then you just kind of see like, was your hypothesis, I know it seems fairly scientific, but it is, was your hypothesis true? Did you like design it the right way? What adjustments did you have to make along the way? And that's before you deploy it. Like all of that, you're supposed to do all of that before you deploy. So just keep that in mind. And then analytics come after you launch it because the job's never done. You're always improving, always like fixing things. This isn't like in the 90s when you would like build something like a website or a digital product and then like a year or two later you'd be like, it's ugly, time to get a new one. It's not like that anymore. Today, it's about building and improving on structures that already exist so that you aren't constantly just changing the game and narrative and investing tons of money and just blowing your ROI out of the water. So that's basically the design process we go with, and we start. All in all, like the thing I want to stress is data-driven decisions. We try to use as much research and data as possible to like make these decisions. So. And that's pretty much our process.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Sam. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow you to share yours. So I put in the chat the link to download. Once again, it's just digitaldesign.tulane.edu/downloads. So feel free to do that, like I said, or feel free to follow along, and we'll send you this video after. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let Sam take over.
Awesome, thank you. I have, just so everyone knows, I turned off my video so that we can concentrate more on, and my computer doesn't blow up, more on the XD side of things because, as I'm sure everyone here has figured out, Zoom will tax out your computer. So I have turned the video off so we don't have any interruption in the audio. So first things first, everyone needs to make sure they've downloaded those files, or you can download them later to follow along. You're going to want to launch XD. It is an Adobe product. And this is the first pop-up you'll get. And this is pretty much your home base. And from here, you can kind of see that there's, it's already looking a little different compared to Illustrator and InDesign. and Photoshop. And the reasons for that is because this software is really made to do completely different things. First things first, it's got viewports. And those viewport settings, which you can access in Illustrator and InDesign in their ready-made settings, these viewports are updated frequently, and they're updated based on the current screen size. The reason we call them viewports is because obviously you view the port, but also not everything in a traditional screen format. You know, like the interface in your car that allows you to connect to, that you may have through Bluetooth and things like that, like it is a screen, but a lot of people don't think of it traditionally as a screen. And so they call it a viewport, and those come in a variety of sizes. It used to be pretty standard. It is not as standard anymore, but you can grab them pretty easily. We've got our phones here, Android mobile and iPhone, like most current iPhones. Your tablets, you can click it to drop down to iPads, iPad Pro, Android Surface, and then web. And web's traditionally, you know, a website, a web app, as you would, you know, encounter them. And these are the pretty standard sizes that most people design at today. And then let's say you've got like an LG or a Google Pixel, and that's not included. You can always see your custom sizes here at any time. And that goes with an Apple Watch as well, or any other like wearable device or wearable tech, or even the screen in your car, you know. So here, this little slider normally would be promo things, but and I don't normally pay a lot of attention to them because Adobe's always trying to sell you stuff. But in this particular situation, this is actually pretty helpful because XD and the experience design is going, is like an evolving market. So they've got a lot of information. You can get tips, because they did just release a ton of new features. Components, they'll give you downloadable components that you can work with in your wireframing stage. You can talk to the community. There's a lot of discussion today about like all of the interactions and things you can do with them. And then the most important feature that XD has that you will not get in any other software is co-editing. And co-editing allows exactly what it says, two people to work on the same file at the same time, which probably sounds bananas if you apply it to like Illustrator, Photoshop, or InDesign. But in XD, when you're trying to build out these micro interactions or all these little tiny details that's going to go on this tiny viewport phone, it can be really important so people can move around the same document and like you'll know who's in there at the same time. And then on the left here, you've got your traditional, like just being able to access your recent documents really quickly. But the thing I want to point out is that XD has add-ons. They really push these in Adobe because everyone's workflow is really different, and they want you to have the ability to tailor make your workflow for whatever you're working on in XD, because like I said, there are so many different types of experience design happening in the app. So you need to insert lorem ipsum, you need to maybe pull up some other UI kits. The three most popular ones are Apple's iOS design, which we all know and love. Google has their material design, and then they also have Microsoft's now as well. Apparently you can now access the Amazon Alexa UI kit. So you've got lots and lots of things to access. Okay, so that's a pretty much overview of what XD looks like when you first pop up. It's really quick and easy to access. We're gonna jump right in and grab an iPhone 10 massive viewport, and it loads up. And again, you're like, whoa, this is way different. Not like anything I've ever seen. And that's true, unless you've worked in Sketch, which is those are the Adobe competitors at this point, and were pretty popular for a really long time. It's called Sketch and Figma. But as of like the end of last year, Adobe released a huge update that put transitions and hover states and all sorts of fun prototyping things into its app, which made it more possible to really work with XD. And so we're going to continue teaching that in class. So the first thing I want to go over here is your right panel. Like I said, it's looking wildly different than what you would expect. So that we've got our traditional alignment tools at the top. We can put in a repeat grid, or we can do Pathfinder or our shape tools here. Component, which we're going to talk about components here in a second. You can adjust the width and X and Y axis. You can make things vertical or horizontal based on landscape or portrait mode. Responsive resize. Now, typically for app design, you don't need to worry too much about responsive resize because apps are pretty native to what they're built on. I'm sure if anybody has an iPad and an iPhone, you know well that those are built to not necessarily work on the same platforms. For instance, I have Instagram on my iPad and there is no iPad Instagram app. So it just looks like this tiny viewport, just like this, swimming in a sea of black. So it doesn't really responsively resize, but this is important because if you're designing a website or a web app, then you need your responsive resizing because everything kind of falls into columns, which we're going to see here in a minute too. You can also disable scrolling. As I don't know if anybody's realized this, but some apps actually don't scroll. They just load new content over and over again. So you can definitely disable that for an experience that you need to change. You can change the background on your app. If you're doing everything in dark mode, this would probably be helpful. And then grid. So grid, everything in digital design really needs to live on a grid. And it's not because we design in pixels. It's really because the grid is fundamental to all of design. It really helps you make sure that everything's lining up the way it needs to. And it's essential in web design and digital design because of that responsive resize. If this were a website and you had multiple columns, the smaller this thing would get, the columns would actually go underneath each other and kind of cascade and fold upon itself. But for the sake of this exercise, we're doing an app, so we don't need to worry too much about that. Let me go back and select my artboard here. All right, so we've got our grid. We can actually adjust the layout, so you can turn it to a square grid if you're more comfortable with, like, a lot of people do use the grid layout when they're wireframing on paper, but I like to use the layouts because of the really bright colors help me see better. I'm going to go with maybe a 6. Let's go with a 6 grid. I'm not going to change the gutter or the column width. I'm pretty good. But if I ever needed to make this my default or use default, I can have those pretty easy right here. So then we're going to come back to this over here. We're going to go all the way to the left. So the left, first thing you see, you got home, which brings this dialog box back. You've got your design tab, your prototype tab, and your share tab. And all of those do different things, which we're going to go through. I'm trying to keep an eye on time as we go along. So we're going to stay in the design tab for right now. You've got your selection tool, which everyone knows that guy. He's still VD, thankfully. You've got a square, a circle, and a triangle. That's all you can make. Nah, you're good. Just kidding. You can make a ton of shapes in here. You do have to do it. You do have to like use the pen tool a little bit, or maybe customize some of the other things. Typically, if you're building out assets that go into your app design, you would use Photoshop and Illustrator in coordination with XD. I just had a student who passed his last class, and he built an app that was kind of almost like a real world situation. It wasn't AR or augmented reality, but he had to use Photoshop to cut out the pieces and parts of the actual individual like camera and everything. So you do still have to use some of those auxiliary programs that you know and love to really like give the details that you want, depending on the experience you're trying to design. But the square, the circle, and the triangle are the most popular and common used shapes when you're wireframing. And that's why they're pretty easy access here. You also got your standard line pen tool, so you can still illustrate in here. Text box. And then this is your artboard. You can, as you can see, you've got a lot more options over here. In XD, it's pretty standard to have multiple artboards, and we're going to get to that in a little while as to why, because we're actually going to prototype a little bit, and the artboards are integral to that. But also, if you're designing something and you want to, let's say we've got our iPhone X, let's say I'm designing, also I want to make sure it looks right in Android mobile, and then click off of my, whoops, I need to do that. You can also say a watch. So this is like the size of a 44mm iWatch, just the Apple Watch. And then you've got your other variety of things here. You can also just custom draw yourself an artboard and edit as needed. So that's an overview of those basic tools. You do also still have your traditional zoom. What you might notice is missing is the hand tool that you have in Photoshop and Illustrator. That hand tool is missing, so you're definitely going to have to rely on your scroll wheel, on your mouse, or your trackpad, or whatever scrolling option you've got. You can also use Command minus and Command plus to zoom in and out. Any questions so far? No one's yelling at me, so I'm going to assume no. Okay, great. Down here at the bottom, you also have the other tools. You have your assets, you have your layers. So don't worry, we didn't get rid of layers. You can also access your artboards through here. So if I double click on my artboard, well, actually you'll see the layers here in a second when we get started. And then you also have your plugins. So I can see the plugins I have installed. So I have Lorem Ipsum, and then I also have this nifty plugin that if I need to add like someone's fun little profile photo, I can drag and drop this, I can make my shape, and then I can click this. And what it's going to do is it's going to insert a custom avatar into my little box. So that's why those plugins are pretty fun. Also, I didn't mention this, and I was going to mention it in a minute, but this will snap to your grid pretty nicely, which is also very helpful. So we're going to go back to assets, and here's where we're going to start plugging along and making our wireframe and our mockup. So I'm going to link the asset that was included in today's downloads. You can grab that from the site later if you need to. And what it's going to do is it's going to load it up here. Now I can also open that file as a completely separate file if I need to like look at it. And I definitely would encourage y'all to do so because it's a tutorial file in and in itself. It was built by a couple of fellows specifically for XD to show off like what it can do. And we're going to see that a little bit in a little while as well. There's like the different transitions and fun things that you can do in XD. They take a little bit more training. So I got to share. So someone kick off. Okay, so let's see here. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start with a wireframe. So the first thing we do, normally when we start with a wireframe, you want to nail out your boxes, and your boxes are basically like where your work goes. So I'm going to make this, I don't know, let's say a 50 pixel high, just like top bar. And we're going to say that this is the bar, and it's going to stretch the full width, and it's going to be the bar that my menu is going to live in. So I'm going to go back to my assets panel, and I'm going to pick one of these colors that came with it. I'm going to pick this big blue, really beautiful thing. Now, normally in wireframe, you say do an apply color, but we are doing this tutorial, and I want you guys to get the most out of it you can. So typically, what you would see is just a very basic set of squares, and normally you'll notice they always have a border, and that's because when you are designing in XD, typically you do everything from a wireframing stage. So it's just to make the life easier. So you've got your border on it automatically. I've got my menu bar. I'm going to come back later and add color. And now I'm going to, what we're going to do today, and this is what I wanted to do, is we're going to design a dashboard for a weather app. I'm pulling up my notes just to make sure I'm not reading anyone screen. So dashboard for a weather app. So we've got our menu at the top. So the first thing I'm going to say, my hypothesis is the first thing is I need to know where I live. So I'm going to put maybe a circle right here. It's going to tell me my area's local weather. That's where my area's local weather is going to go. And I'm going to go ahead and fill it in with like a pretty light gray, just to give me an idea of like it's going to be filled in with something that's not just a color, basic color. Now, just checking my settings. Now there's also, as you see, there might be a couple things that change along the way. You can actually make your borders rounded. You can push them inside or outside. You can also give your box a drop shadow. And that's typically in most design, drop shadow is considered a no-no, but it's really helpful in digital products sometimes because it can really differentiate like something coming off the page. It's hard sometimes to design with depth in web, and so drop shadows are still pretty popular. You can also do a background or an object blur. But one thing you might notice is some features are limited, and that's because this is where things start to get blurry between development and design. They really have to make sure that they don't incorporate things in here that a developer could not do with code. And that's why, like, over time, you'll see even more things added. And you also have mark for export, because you can package this up and send this to a developer and or a programmer and then build it out. So we've got our circle. I'm going to grab my text box, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my location right here.
Hey, Sam, I think that's a really good point that you just made, where I think kind of, you know, having everyone understand that this is setting up the overall tone, the overall layout, and then the next step after you flesh it out in XD is you would then send it to a developer to actually make it work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is, in XD, this is definitely a program where you can get started, like not only start your design, but also take it the full route. You can get really, what we normally do is you get really far within it and build out your prototype, which is what we're going to do towards the end here, and turn it into something that like can be exported for a developer, because a developer, because that's actually something I do as well. I also do not just design, but development. And I specialize specifically in websites. And so oftentimes when someone designs something that is made for that, I'll have to ask them to export, either package the file for me, because I'm also a designer, so I know what to grab. But if I'm not a designer, and traditional programmers and developers don't know Adobe products sometimes, they won't know what they need. They just know they need a PNG or an SVG. They need those image files. They need specification files. Like, what colors are they going to use? What fonts are they going to use? And so an export file from XD, and also some of the other products like Illustrator and InDesign, will also come with a text file that says like what fonts were used or typefaces. Sorry for anyone who's printing right now. In web, it's called a font because of the accessibility of certain typefaces and fonts. But also what colors are used. We use hex codes because it generates the color more easily. A lot of people are also starting to use sRGB and ARGB, which is what your screens render in, your monitors. So it's getting a little more complicated out there, gonna have to say. But it's all pretty, the good thing about the internet is it's all pretty accessible. So we've got our location, we've got our zip code. We're gonna have our main weather piece here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do like maybe, I'm gonna break this area up, because breaking an area up from a hierarchical standpoint really helps make sure that you're, you know, what's included in what section and what is not. So this area, I'm going to indicate that it's going to be shaded in too. So this area is going to be shaded in. And just to make sure that, let's say I'm going to build the wireframe, but I'm not going to build the design. That's happened sometimes too. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put a big X right here to make sure that someone knows this is an image. Just leave my dog in the background. There we go. All right, so we got our X, and that typically does across the board, no matter what program you're in, that usually indicates that this must be filled with an image. XD will actually automatically do it for you if you grab the image embedded tool, I think it's called. But in XD, you have to draw an X. All right, so we've got our area here. And in this area, I'm going to put a couple of circles. So it's a weekly, 5-day forecast. So what we need to do is get our 5-day forecast up. So what I've done is I've made my circle with the circle tool. And if you hold down Option and drag it, it will make sure that your circle contains, like, stays in a ratio and not turn into an oval. And then I grab it with my selection tool and click and hold down Option, and what that allows me to do is copy and drag it all in one go. So again, normally we would do a 5-day forecast, but because we've got our 6 columns, we're gonna go ahead and make it 6 days. And then we're gonna need to do our header. Weather forecast. And so just like in Illustrator and InDesign, when you're trying to lay out pieces that, from a digital layout standpoint, whether it be for print or anything else, you want to make sure that your fonts and your typefaces have a hierarchical situation. So the most important thing on this screen so far is my location, because I want to know what my weather is first right now. Then I want to know my weather forecast. And so this is kind of like a subhead. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the text area and kind of knock this down a little bit. I'm going to center it. And then we also have some other features. We can modify the leading, or as it's called in web, it's called line height. So in case you see this pop up and say something different. So it's line spacing. Adobe doesn't like to use proper language sometimes. It's called line height. And then we also have your traditional other type setting rules like uppercase, lowercase, sentence case, things like that. You'll notice that there's no sort of drop cap area. That's not really prevalent on the web. And it's not easily replicatable, and it's probably not even the right word. It's not easy to replicate in the code. Excuse me. So, and then we can also modify. We want to make it bold. We're gonna leave it regular for now. All right. So we can also modify our appearance. You can do some overlays and some effects that you would normally see. Those are actually pretty prevalent on the web right now, which is pretty interesting. I'm encountering those lately. So I'm going to give this some padding. And so the space, this gutter in between these columns, is also considered a margin or padding. And so the space between the subhead and this group of circles is a little tight for me. So I'm going to drop it down just a touch. And what you want to see is, if you notice those numbers on the left here, those are your pixels, like how many pixels you're dropping it down and up. So what I'm trying to do is keep everything, this is just a personal practice, it's not like a mandate from the World Wide Web Consortium or anything, but I like to try to keep everything within like a system of 5. So like, I wouldn't leave this at like 93 or something like that. I would probably, try to keep it, so it says 97, I'd probably go ahead and just nudge it down to 100. And what it does is it kind of keeps things in a more even area. So something else I just did was, since I had all these together selected, which you can drag your cursor and select them all if you need to, I went ahead and grabbed them, and then if you do Command G, you can group them together. And that makes it easier if you need to move them all later. There we go. And then underneath each one of these, probably will have a temperature. And we'll put a number there. Just a reminder, Command Z is your undo. There we go. So that's going to be our low, or our high, excuse me, which is important because you have the high at the top because it's higher than the low, right? And then we've got our low at the bottom. All right, so we've got our weather forecast. So something else I want to mention is this little area here in interaction design is called a card. And so this particular card can have its own design. And sometimes, depending on where you're working and what projects you're working on, they'll have somebody who designs only this portion of the app. They'll design just this card and ship it off or send it out to the people who are working on everything. All right, we're gonna do it. Okay. So I'm gonna just grab a little bit. Make sure I get my rule of 5s in there. 15. Okay. And then I think down here, what I'm going to do is, let's see, what else would you find on the weather app? maybe it'll be a calendar. So just grab our little box, a couple lines. Use my option key and the arrow key to, oh, okay. My option key and drag this down 50. Option key, drag this down 50. Make sure not to grab the box. Maybe grab the box. And I think I'm gonna go ahead. Yep. You can also see over here. I'm going to make sure that says 35. This one says 100. All right, we've got our calendar. I'm going to go ahead and copy the weather forecast and bring that down to right here. There's no reason this needs to be any different because it's as you scroll, you know, and as you work your way down this particular app, you'll be able to see like as things come along. All right, so this is a wireframe. This is what we made. Oh no, one second. This is a wireframe. And now I'm going to go up here. If you select the name of the artboard, you can now turn your grid off and you see what's pretty standard wireframe. So now what we're going to do is, let's say this goes to the stakeholders or the user experience designers or even the client and they approve it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move more into design. So I'm going to turn my grid off. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start applying color. So the reason we linked the UI kit is because in interactive design, a lot of times the way things are moving these days is something called design systems. And design systems is kind of like a living, breathing brand guide. And what that means is that in the past, you would get a pretty static PDF that said, this is your brand, these are the typefaces and fonts we use, these are the icons we've made for you. But now, you know, brands are living, breathing things. They change all the time. And just like websites, you don't want to go back and keep constantly building them over and over again. You want to build upon them. Brands are the same way. You want to build upon them. And so, as we all know, Adobe XD is pretty prevalent all over the world. Creative Cloud, which is now a cloud-based service, has given us the ability to have a Creative Cloud library. And so what you can do by establishing a UI kit and then editing that UI kit elsewhere, it will change universally across everyone's designs. We're not going to get into that today because it's almost a whole separate section of learning that takes like a little bit longer. But what we are going to go ahead and do is use that UI kit that we linked and just apply our colors. So I'm going to go ahead and make this pink just because, just a reminder, you go turn off your borders. Once you start turning this into a full-blown mock-up from a wireframe, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my, you know what, no, let me back up. Because I want you to be able to see how we move through things. So what I'm going to actually do, excuse me, is I'm going to copy and paste this so that you can see it next to each other. That also helps too because if someone's trying out different designs, you can try out multiple things in one go. Make that blue, I mean pink, apparently I don't know what colors are today. Let's see here, I'm gonna go down here to my plugins. I'm gonna make, this is not supposed to be a person, but it's supposed to be a weather icon. I have actually, the other file that's located in the downloads section is a set of icons and also fonts, but icons that allow you, that are weather icons, specifically open source, free to use. So we're going to use that. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my X here. And I'm going to drag, let's say, I don't know, it's just get pretty rainy here soon. Let's just go ahead and we'll grab this guy. You can actually drag and drop him straight into the circle. And now he's applied in. I can also select him by double clicking and resize him within the circle. Make sure you hold down, I'm sorry, make the circle larger. And then if I double click, it should let me, yeah, there we go. If you double click within it, you should be able to move it around and then you can. I'm going to actually size my circle. So again, see if we can over here, layers. Actually select, but then you can either double click or you can use the layers. All right, so double click. Yes. How many times I have to click it? There we go. This is a mask group now, which if you've used Photoshop, you know is when a shape can then apply like a certain mask over the top of an image. So this lives within that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to nudge this up a bit. So if we double click on it, it'll allow you to modify the shape that it lives in. And I actually want to size that back down to where I had it. And then if I click, I'm just going to do it. That makes sense. So if I click the artboard here, double click that, and then come down, you can actually click on the asset you drag and drop within and resize as needed. There we go. Now this icon is an SVG, and an SVG is a special type of, as you can see, it looks crazy. It's a special type of file that basically means that it is both code and visual. So it's a code-based file, but you can like see it visually because most computers know to render it visually, and that's the point that it serves. But basically what this looks like is you can open this up in a text editor or any file editor, and you can edit these points and then upload that to a browser or a computer, and it would know, okay, those are coordinates, let me map this out and make this into a file. And so that's an SVG. It's a very efficient way to deliver static images that are like this, pretty much straightforward illustrations, anything that doesn't have a lot of gradient or color. Logos are moving towards SVG for a better, quicker delivery system, depending on their application, as it were. So we're going to let that stay black, I think, and then location, we're going to say New Orleans. Go ahead and make this a nice bold because I want it to stand out. And the fill color will be your text color. And we're going to go back over to our assets and make sure that we're grabbing the right pink here. There we go. Back up. And then our zip code. Now this is not as important. I know I'm in New Orleans, but the zip code itself might actually indicate more of a hyper-local weather situation. I don't know if anybody uses Wonderground, but it's kind of like that. That's less important, so we're going to knock it down a little bit in size. And we could probably make it light. And then I'm going to group these pieces together and kind of center them. This is an area where maybe we're finessing our wireframe. We're really making it shine as a mock-up. So I'll probably turn my grid back on to make sure I'm really paying attention to that grid structure. Grid layout. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, I think the background, we're going to make the background this little card here and make it black. I'm going to grab our text. Actually, might be easier to grab from the layer. So these are all your text layers here. You can grab them all in one go. I'm going to make them white. And then what I'm going to do is make all these circles group together. I'm going to make them white because the icons are black. Makes sense. I'm going to turn off your border because the border was only needed for wireframing purposes. The number one issue that we have in class is trying to remind students to turn off the border when you move into a mock-up. So I'll make this bold, and I think maybe we'll make it all uppercase. Just because traditionally it's harder to read uppercase letters versus lowercase letters, but I think someone would be able to look at this pretty easily and know, okay, that's a weather forecast. And let's see here. So I'm going to drag and drop. So I don't know, things are pretty crazy these days. So I think the next thing that's going to happen is probably, I don't know why we have an alien head. That's fun. So it's obviously going to be hot. So let's just say, okay, a meteor is going to come. So let's just, throw a meteor in there. So what you see, we drag and drop our element in there, and as you can see, it kind of changed the circle a little bit. And that sometimes happens based on the asset that you're dragging and dropping. So what you do is you just go back in, and you can either do a pass-through, or you should be able to have a white background behind it. But what happens with the mask sometimes is that, in this case, it's an SVG. It will actually apply the color that you have on the mask to the SVG. So I think for this purpose, we'll probably leave it as is, and we'll change it to, let's say, I don't know, maybe a fun gradient meteor coming our way. And then maybe like, we're not going to do that because we don't want to summon things with bad juju. So let's say, I don't know, maybe we'll get sleep the next day because who knows what's going on in 2020 anymore. Do some gradient on that. And then, I don't know, maybe some fog. Look at crazy weather we got going. It's going to be really crazy humidity. I mean, when is there not, right? So the other thing too is like when you drag and drop it in that element, it will try to fill the whole element. And you know, this one looks a little bit big in comparison. So maybe we do not let it stay the same size, let it fill. Grab it from the layers panel, hold down the shift key so that it doesn't lose its ratio. Okay. I don't know, what else should have happened? Maybe there'll be nighttime storms. I don't know. Let's get sleeping on it.
Sam, when you have a second, we've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Absolutely, yeah. Just, I mean, should I stop, or I can answer them now while I'm working?
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you want to take a look at the chat, and then we'll wrap it up from there.
Okay. Well, in that case, let me just give me just a second. I actually wanted to show you guys. So this is pretty much what you do for your mockup. You move forward, and then when you go to prototyping, that's when things get really crazy, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff. You still see your assets panel, but you go to layers, and you can select individual pieces. And so you can say, this is my home, or this is my home. I'm selecting that, and then you can drag and drop this from panel to panel, and you can tell this to, like, you tap it and it goes to the next artboard. And that's why artboards are really important. I still have this open, so I want to show this. Wasn't sure we're going to get to it, so I'm going to just show you guys. This is kind of, if you come up here and you click play while you're in the prototype area, you can actually see how they animate. And so this is a really good tutorial to work through just to learn how animation's working. You can kind of look and see how they've made it happen. This is another one, pretty great. Only animated that one. There's a couple drawbacks. You can only animate one thing per artboard, so you definitely want to keep that in mind. And then I think this is the one I like to show people now, because it's really animated and I think really shows how you can definitely bring playful elements into these transitions and these interactions. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you guys to make sure you go through this auto animate tutorial just to see the possibilities. There's lots of fun stuff. And then the share feature is mostly just here. It shows you your whole workboard, but basically like your link will appear here, and you can actually set things on design review, development, presentation. You can actually do a user testing setup. They've got different setups for you, and you can make a link that people can view publicly or with a password that will allow them to be able to make make comments and suggestions, or just like be able to interact with. So they don't even have to look at your file. They don't even have to have XD. They don't even have to have a computer. They can look at your file on their phone, in a browser, or anywhere all over the web. So, and that's a beginner of XD, because XD is a sorry, I lost you guys there for a minute. That's XD. It's really big. Possibilities, like tons of just new stuff that they've put in recently. I definitely would encourage you guys to play with that auto animate.
Awesome, thank you. We appreciate that. Okay, do you want to take a quick look at the chat?
Oh yeah, definitely. Let me grab it. All right.
Kind of address those questions.
Can you import video into XD? Actually, it's the other way around. So After Effects is something that a lot of people have been using in coordination with XD. You would import your XD file into After Effects and it populates all the layers, they play well together. Part of the reason transitions came around and they put more interaction features into XD is because After Effects is so intimidating to a lot of people. But if anyone does find themselves kind of like hesitant, ProtoPie is a piece of software that Google uses to do their interactive testing and prototyping. So you can definitely check that out. And if you want video versus that, yeah, you would have to pull that into XD to place your video within it. And then you can't re-export to a prototype. You would have to do a video of your file. Okay, let's see here. Is there a format painter tool? You know, that would be lovely. But what you can do, and that's where that design systems thing come in. So you can select multiple items and click the color, and it would format them all the same. But what you can do is also set up your design system file, your UI kit, and then when you link it in and then you edit that particular icon within it in any way, like you change it to a certain color or whatnot, you want to make sure it's a component first, and that's something you can apply to a certain asset in the assets panel, and then you should be able to change it like system-wide on other people's things, unless they take that component and edit it within the program, because they can make like a special just component just for that program, in that file, excuse me. Yeah, this one's wildly different than the rest, guys.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it's good to give kind of an overview, and now everybody can go back and sort of watch the video after and keep playing with it. But I think it gives an overview of the basics, of the tools, and the interface. I think that's really valuable. Definitely. Well, it's almost on the clock. Thank you, Samantha, for taking us through that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Like I said, next week is our final Design Lagniappe, and it's going to be on Procreate. So if you have Procreate downloaded on your iPad, or if you just want to follow along to see what is Procreate and how to use it for illustration, we would love to have you. So next week, same time, same place, noon on Wednesday, and we'll see you then. Bye, everybody.